Sometimes, even the strongest hearts break in silence. Ty has always been the man who fixes others, the one who steps in when things fall apart. But what happens when he's the one who needs fixing? When the world he built with love and determination starts to crumble, and the only thing left standing is his pride. This is the moment Ty realizes that to chase his dream, he must first learn something he's never done before: ask for help. The sun was sinking behind the hills of Heartland, painting the sky in soft gold and fading pink. The wind carried the smell of hay and horses, the same scent that once filled Ty's heart with peace. But today, that peace was gone. He stood near the barn, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, watching a horse limp slowly across the paddock. Once upon a time, he would have been running over to help, full of energy, full of purpose. Now, he just stood there, tired in a way that no sleep could fix. It wasn't the long days or the constant work that weighed him down. It was the feeling that he was losing touch with the part of himself that used to believe in something more. The clinic wasn't doing great. Bills were stacking up. The phone didn't ring as often as it used to. The town had new vets now, younger, with better equipment and fresh ideas. Ty didn't mind competition, but lately, he couldn't shake the thought that maybe he was being left behind. When he went home at night, the walls of the small house felt too quiet. He missed Amy's laughter, the sound of her boots on the porch, the easy way she used to remind him that life wasn't just about work. Even the photo of her on the wall seemed to look back at him with a kind of sadness. He wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, the man who used to fight for every dream had started to doubt his own. That evening, as he sat on the old wooden steps, he thought about the promise he made years ago to build something meaningful, something lasting. He wanted to create a place where people and animals could heal, where second chances weren't just words but real possibilities. But now, even that dream felt far away, maybe too far. The ranch was quiet except for the sound of the horses settling in for the night. Ty rubbed his face and sighed. He knew he couldn't keep going like this, pretending everything was fine. But how could he admit he needed help? To him, asking for help meant weakness, and weakness was something he'd spent his whole life running from. He leaned back, staring up at the stars, searching for some kind of answer in the vast night sky. Somewhere deep down, he knew the truth. If he didn't change something soon, he was going to lose everything he'd worked for, maybe even himself. The night grew colder, and the wind picked up, carrying a whisper through the trees, soft, almost like a voice he used to know. You don't have to do it alone, Ty. He closed his eyes, letting the memory wash over him. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks, but it felt real. It felt like Amy. And for the first time in a long time, something inside him stirred. Not hope, not yet, but the faint spark of it, the kind of spark that could light a fire if he let it. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop pretending he was okay. Maybe it was time to take that first small step, not toward success, but toward healing. Ty stood, his boots crunching softly against the dirt, and looked out at the open fields stretching into the night. They seemed endless, filled with both the past and the future, waiting to meet. He took a deep breath, his chest heavy but alive, and whispered to the quiet air, "I can't do this alone anymore." The words hung there for a moment, fragile but true. They felt strange on his tongue, but also right. It wasn't a cry for help. It was an admission of strength, the kind that comes from finally being honest with yourself. For the first time in months, Ty felt a small piece of the burden lift, as the first stars shimmered brighter overhead. He turned and walked back toward the barn. Tomorrow wasn't going to fix everything, but maybe it didn't have to. Maybe it just had to be the start of something new. Morning came quietly at Heartland, with sunlight spilling through the thin curtains of Ty's small bedroom. Dust floated in the air like slow, golden snowflakes, and for a moment, everything seemed calm. But calm didn't mean peace. Ty woke up feeling that same weight pressing against his chest, the one that made it hard to breathe, hard to move, hard to care. He sat at the edge of his bed, rubbing his eyes, and tried to remember the last time he truly felt alive doing what he loved. The truth was, he couldn't. The sound of horses outside once filled him with excitement, but now it only reminded him of the endless cycle of days' work, exhaustion, and silence. He walked to the barn, boots crunching softly on the frosted grass. Spartan, Amy's old horse, neighed softly when he saw him. That sound used to mean everything to Ty. It was comfort, connection. But today, it felt like a whisper from a past life. Ty reached out and ran a hand along Spartan's neck, feeling the warmth of the animal under his palm. "You're still holding on," he murmured quietly. "Guess I should too." Spartan blinked slowly, leaning into his touch as if to say, "You're not done yet." Ty smiled faintly, but it didn't last long. Inside the barn, the light flickered as the wind blew through the gaps in the wood. Ty sat on a hay bale and pulled out his old notebook. The one filled with plans and sketches of the clinic he once dreamed of building. A place with open pastures, space for rescues, and a small team of young vets who'd share his passion for healing animals. Page after page was covered in details, names, and numbers. Dreams that once burned bright, now fading in pencil smudges and dust. He turned the pages slowly, the corners curling from years of neglect. "What happened to you, Ty?" he whispered, voice heavy with regret. It wasn't just the work that had worn him down. It was the loneliness. The nights when he'd sit outside, staring at the stars, pretending Amy was up there watching over him. He wanted to believe that, but faith was hard when every day felt like a fight he was losing. He'd built his life around fixing what was broken, but now, he couldn't fix himself. The feeling scared him more than he wanted to admit. That afternoon, he got a call from Scott, his old mentor. Ty didn't answer. He watched the phone light up on the workbench, the name glowing like a reminder of everything he was avoiding. Scott had been checking in lately, asking if Ty needed help, if he wanted to talk. But Ty always found a reason to stay silent. Pride had built walls around him, and fear kept them standing. After a few moments, the phone stopped ringing. The barn went quiet again, and the loneliness crept back in. He spent the rest of the day trying to keep busy mending fences, cleaning stalls, fixing things that didn't really need fixing. Anything to stop his mind from wandering to the one thing he didn't want to face. The thought that maybe he couldn't do this alone anymore. As the sun dipped low, he sat on the fence and watched the sky turn from gold to gray. His hands were calloused, his face tired, his spirit thin. The world around him kept moving, but he felt stuck, like time had left him behind. Later that night, Ty found himself sitting by the fireplace, staring into the flames. The sound of crackling wood filled the room, steady and comforting. He thought of Amy again, her voice, her smile. The way she always believed in him when he didn't. If she were here now, she'd tell him to stop trying to carry the world on his shoulders. She'd tell him to ask for help. He closed his eyes, hearing her laughter in the back of his mind. For a moment, it almost felt real. Then, out of nowhere, he felt the dam inside him begin to crack. The emotions he'd buried for months, maybe years, started to rise. Regret, fear, exhaustion, all mixed together until it was too much. His breath hitched as his eyes filled with tears. He hadn't cried in a long time, but now he couldn't stop. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just quiet tears that fell onto his hands as he whispered, "I miss you, Amy. I miss who I used to be." The fire popped, a spark leaping upward before disappearing into the air. Ty took a deep breath, wiping his face. The storm inside him had finally broken, and though it hurt, it also brought a strange kind of relief. Maybe this was what healing looked like, not sudden or easy, but slow and painful. He looked around the room, eyes falling on the phone again. For a long time, he stared at it, hesitating. Then, finally, he picked it up. His fingers trembled as he scrolled to Scott's name. He didn't press call, not yet, but for the first time. He thought about it. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that maybe this was the first step. Maybe asking for help wasn't weakness. Maybe it was courage, the kind of courage Amy always saw in him. He placed the phone on the table, the screen still glowing softly in the dim light, and as he leaned back in his chair, he knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, he was going to make that call. The next morning, the world felt different. The sky wasn't brighter, the air wasn't warmer, but something inside Ty had shifted. It was small, a quiet kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout but steadies your breath. He stood outside the barn, coffee mug in hand, watching the mist rise over the fields. For once, he didn't feel like running from his thoughts. He just let them come. The memory of last night lingered, the tears, the silence, the decision he hadn't yet acted on, but it was there, waiting for him, like the sunrise waiting to break through the clouds. He walked back into the house, the phone still lying on the table where he'd left it. His thumb hovered over Scott's name again. So much history in one small contact, the man who had believed in him when no one else did. Ty could almost hear his voice, calm and patient, the way it always had been when Ty first started out. "You're not just fixing animals, Ty. You're learning to fix yourself." Back then, he didn't understand what Scott meant. Now, he did. He hesitated, then took a deep breath and pressed call. The ring felt longer than it should have. His heart pounded, his mind racing with second thoughts. But before he could hang up, the line clicked. "Ty." Scott's familiar voice came through, warm and steady. For a second, Ty couldn't speak. The words tangled in his throat, heavy with months of silence. "Hey, Scott," he finally managed, his voice rough. "I think I need some help." There was a pause, not of judgment, but of understanding. "You have no idea how good it is to hear you say that," Scott replied. "Tell me what's been going on." And just like that, something inside Ty broke open. He talked, really talked for the first time in what felt like forever. About the clinic, about the burnout, about how lost he felt. He didn't hold back this time. He told Scott everything. From the fear of failure to the guilt that still haunted him. Scott listened quietly, letting Ty's words spill out like water breaking through a dam. When Ty finally stopped, there was another long pause. Then Scott said, "You've been carrying too much alone. Ty, you've always had the strength. But strength doesn't mean silence. It's time to rebuild, and you don't have to do it by yourself." Ty's throat tightened again. But this time it wasn't from pain, it was from relief. Someone understood. Someone still believed in him. Over the next hour, they made plans. Scott offered to help him bring the clinic back to life, to modernize it, to get some new equipment, maybe even bring in an assistant. "There's a young vet in Hudson, looking for experience," Scott mentioned. "She reminds me of you when you first came here, rough around the edges, but full of heart. Maybe she could help." Ty wasn't sure if he was ready for that, but for the first time, the idea didn't scare him. It gave him something to look forward to. When the call ended, Ty sat in silence for a long time, the phone still in his hand. The sun had risen higher now, spilling light across the room. It fell on Amy's picture hanging by the doorway. He looked at it, smiling faintly. "I did it," he whispered. "I finally asked for help." It wasn't much, but it was everything. He felt lighter somehow, like the air around him had shifted. The heaviness was still there, but now it had space to breathe. That afternoon, Ty drove into town. The roads were lined with trees shedding their last leaves, the world painted in soft shades of gold and brown. He stopped by the clinic, stepping inside for the first time in weeks. Dust covered the counters, papers scattered across the desk. It smelled like emptiness and old dreams, but standing there, Ty didn't feel defeated. He felt determined. He ran his hand across the table, clearing away the dust, and smiled. "All right," he muttered to himself. "Let's start over." He began, small, cleaning up, organizing, fixing broken tools. Each small task felt like a step forward. By sunset, the place looked almost alive again. As the light faded through the windows, Ty leaned against the wall, exhausted but satisfied. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost. He felt grounded, connected to something real. The dream wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for him to return. That night, back at the ranch, Ty sat outside under the stars again. The sky was clear, endless. He looked up and whispered, "I'm trying, Amy. I really am. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, she was smiling too." He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. More work, more challenges, maybe even setbacks. But tonight, he had taken the first step toward healing, and that was enough. The silence around him no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. The kind of peace that comes when a broken heart finally decides to start mending. A week later, the Heartland clinic buzzed with a life it hadn't known in years. Dust no longer sat on the shelves. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and fresh hay, and sunlight streamed through clean windows, catching the faint sparkle of metal instruments newly polished. Ty stood by the door, arms crossed, watching the quiet motion of a young woman tending to an injured foal. Her name was Clara. Scott's recommendation. She was quick-handed but gentle, nervous yet passionate, and there was something about her that reminded Ty of himself all those years ago when he'd first come to Heartland. Uncertain but full of fire, Clara glanced up from her work. "You sure I'm doing this right?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. Ty smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You're doing fine. Just trust your instincts. The animal can feel it when you're confident." She nodded, focusing again on her patient. Watching her, Ty felt something stir inside him, that quiet spark of purpose that had been buried under exhaustion and self-doubt. It wasn't roaring back all at once, but it was there, flickering brighter with each moment. After the foal was settled, Clara turned to him, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You've built something special here," she said softly. "Even if it doesn't look like much right now, you can feel it. It's got heart." Ty looked around the clinic, the chipped paint, the worn counters, the quiet hum of animals resting. For the first time in a long time, he saw it the way she did. Not as something broken, but something worth rebuilding. "Yeah," he replied, his voice thoughtful. "Heartland's always had that." As days passed, Ty and Clara fell into a rhythm. Mornings began early, with rounds through the ranch and emergency calls from nearby farms. Evenings ended with long talks over coffee, planning improvements for the clinic. Scott visited now and then, his presence steady and encouraging. Slowly, the place began to change, not through miracles, but through effort, through care, through community. The old clinic sign was repainted, equipment repaired, and word began to spread that Ty Borden was back, and stronger than ever. One late afternoon, after tending to a rescued mare, Ty stood outside watching the sunset. The sky burned with color orange, gold, pink, like it was on fire. Clara came up beside him, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You ever think about what drives you?" she asked. Ty tilted his head. "Every day," he said honestly. "Used to think it was just about saving animals. But now I think it's about giving them and people another chance. Maybe that's all any of us need." She smiled at that, and for a moment, the silence between them was comfortable. The ranch stretched wide before them, the land breathing again, the horses moving freely in the fading light. Everything felt alive. Ty took a deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs, and felt something settle inside him, a peace he hadn't known in years. The ache hadn't vanished completely, but it no longer ruled him. It had softened, turned into something he could live with. Something that reminded him of how far he'd come. That night, Ty sat by the fire again. The flames danced gently, casting a warm glow across the room. On the table beside him lay his old notebook, its pages now filled with fresh plans, sketches of new stables, outlines for a mentorship program, ideas for a mobile clinic to reach distant farms. This time, the dreams didn't feel impossible. They felt real, within reach. He picked up the notebook and smiled, tracing his name on the cover. "Guess we're not done yet," he whispered. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sounds of life from the barn, the horses shifting, the dogs barking softly, the hum of work that would start again tomorrow. Ty looked toward Amy's photo on the mantel. The smile in the picture was the same one that used to steady him on his hardest days. "You were right," he murmured. "I didn't have to do it alone." As he leaned back, the firelight flickering across his face, Ty realized something simple but powerful. His dream hadn't died. It had been waiting for him to heal, to grow, to understand that strength wasn't in never falling, but in standing up again and again, no matter how many times life knocked him down. And now, surrounded by warmth, by purpose, by the quiet pulse of hope returning, Ty Borden finally felt alive. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, long days, hard choices, unexpected storms, but for the first time, Ty wasn't afraid. He was ready to build, to teach, to live. The dream that once seemed too far was now right there in front of him, shining brighter than the dawn rising over Heartland. And as the first light of morning crept across the horizon, painting the land in gold, Ty smiled softly to himself. The journey wasn't over, it was just beginning again.